Joining us here at Olds Performance and Machine. I'm going to take you through this great debate whether to restrict or whether not to restrict. There's books that are published where they say don't restrict. All of that is a lot of hype, it's a lot of nonsense. Others say it's important to restrict. So I'm going to take you through this and I'm going to give you guys a thorough explanation as far as the oiling circuitry in these engines. And when you're elevating torque and horsepower levels, what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done in these engines. So the debate, whether to restrict or whether not to restrict. Let me give you an understanding of the circuitry in this motor here. What happens is as the oil pump and its picks up that oil and sends it through the passages. And the way these passages work in these Oldsmobile engines, and we're talking about here this 455 in specific. This was a 496 that came in from a shop that had did it under 300 miles. It wasted some bearings in it. I'm going to figure out why it did it. This particular engine builder does not believe in oil restriction. And it goes to show and prove that without redirection of oil down onto the mains or onto the rods or damming of it at the lifter bore area, whereas if not, it would be massively flowing to the top of the engine, really leaving no pressure or volume down on the mains to create that swedging effect, that area or that clearance between the main journal and its main bearing. So the way the circuitry works in these motors is it goes ahead and picks up from the oil pan, and obviously this block is upside down, and it will pump it through this particular hole, through the main, this hole. It comes out into the filter housing, through the filter's media, from the exterior of the filter's media to the interior of the filter's media, and sends it back through this hole. Now, this is important here. When it comes through this hole, it, as you could see the passage back here, it enters or intersects with the center between the cam tunnel and that back main bearing where it feeds the crankshaft. Now, what it also does is, besides feeding into the center here, which feeds the main bearing, it also feeds up to, and remember this is upside down, the passenger lifter valley or oil galley that goes front to back. All right. And that passenger oil galley that goes front to back intersects down through passages through number 4, number 3, and number 2. So yes, the passenger galley does feed the mains, but also it's fed through the back main as well, creating the circuitry through the crankshaft as it zigzags through the crankshaft and oils on the mains and oils on the rods. Here's what happens. You need the additional clearance when you're elevating torque output in these motors. When you make that additional clearance between your main bearing and your main journal on your crankshaft, you need to alter or you need to make changes to that oil pump so that the oil pump can keep it swedged or wedged in between those larger clearances. So you're creating more volume by backing it with pressure through the oil pump to keep it happy in the main because you made additional clearance there. And that's the correct way to go with these engines. You need additional clearances. In these, you can't run factory clearances because the crank will touch down when the block or 80-pound crank starts to flex around a bit. And you take it up over those average RPMs. That's important. What happens here is, in the event you don't have that dam built up at your lifter bores, or that redirection or restriction at your lifter bores, okay, you're going to get a massive flow. Each of those lifter bores has an orifice of roughly 140 thousandths. That's times 16 there. Okay, now one might say, well, the clearance between the lifter and its bore really maybe is only 2 thou or 1 thou and 8 tenths. So it really doesn't matter that 140 thousandths hole. It's only subject to the smallest or tightest area. That's true. But what many forget here is when they forego restrictors, lifter bore restrictors, or some sort of damming process to prevent the massive oil flow. And I'm going to show you really where the problem is. The problem is right here. It's right in the lifters, and it's right in the manufacturing of the lifters in the industry. They pass through a significant amount of oil up to the top. You got sizable holes here on these bodies, okay? And the internals, the plus or minus tolerances nowadays versus years ago are different. We're going longer on tooling to be more cost effective. That means our tolerance plus and minuses need to be even greater when we build or when they build these lifters. You could actually see this. The amount that is gushing through these lifters on the market is absolutely incredible. And it comes right up and unloads in the valve cover, through the push rod and unloads in the valve cover. So if you don't have some sort of blocking or restricting or damming up of the oil prior to getting into the lifters, you're going to flood the top. And when you're flooding the top of the motor, you're not keeping oil on the mains and on the rods. This is why we truly believe, and we have designed different lifter restriction packages or restriction packages for these engines to increase the area or the clearance in the main to allow it to live, to alter that oil pump so it can provide volume and pressure, and then to restrict going into the lifter so that it's reduced. A significant amount of bleed by up and through is reduced. Now, there was some talk about, well, it doesn't necessarily feed through the main. It mainly focuses on the passenger oil passage and feeding down through the number 2, 3, and 4. Well, what'll happen is the oil flow from your start to finish will take the path of least resistance. And yes, that path of least resistance will alter or change in the event it doesn't have restriction. It will change it, and it will create less coming through here and more going up top and feeding down through here. The object is, by damming it or restricting it at the lifter bore, now what's going on here is it's got focus through here, okay, as well as redirecting down here. So now you've altered it significantly to keep the volume down on the mains. You can really not have a situation whereas you're running tighter clearances or that of factory and expect it to live. Nor can you afford to run the looser clearances without any sort of restriction or limiting the mass amount of oil flow up to the top. This is why restrictors are important. It's also why don't believe everything you read in a book. Just because a book is published doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Have someone give you an understanding of the circuitry of these motors, what has to be done. If it makes sense, it's correct. If it doesn't make sense, then it's all hearsay. We've been at these for quite some time. We understand them. We understand the circuitry, and we develop products for them so that they live. Well, thanks for tuning in here at Olds Performance Products and Olds Performance and Machine. You could check out our Facebook page, Olds Performance and Machine, or you can just give us a call if there's parts you guys are looking for or for advice, 1-800-382-1320. Thanks for joining us.